here. We're sure that next time we'll send out the correct link, and it actually is the same link from week to week for this class, if that's helpful at all. So last week, somebody wrote in the comments when we were talking about fear versus faith and how y'all were feeling, somebody wrote, what's really hard for them is that everything is so unknown. You know, everything is so unknown from day to day. Everything is so unknown, you know, tomorrow, beyond tomorrow, the future. And it really impacts on everybody. You know, if you're a child, you know, you have the whole issue of schooling, you know, being separated from your friends, having your learning cut short. Certainly for people who go to school in less affluent areas, they don't have access to the same technology, which means they don't have the capacity to do remote learning in the same way as some of our other school children can. And we just don't realize, you know, how much is unknown even for the little ones. And then of course for their parents and for adults as well, young adults, you know, kids who are in college, you know, who had internships that were going to potentially lead to jobs, you know, what the job market will look like for them after graduation, now that we're in a pandemic with an economic downturn, just a lot of unknowns. And similarly for adults, you know, whether it's work or just when might our lives resume some sort of normalcy, and what might that new normalcy look like, and how is it possible, you know, to stay in the present without experiencing really overwhelming anxiety, etc. So I thought today we would take sort of one more week to deal with kind of these sorts of feelings and how Judaism deals with this very human desire to have some modicum of control over our lives, to have some sense of, you know, what's coming the next day, you know, to have some kind of faith in that which has always been true will be true going forward. Just for example, you know, I think we've believed for decades, maybe even 100 years, you know, certainly in the Jewish community, that if you get an education, your future is assured, right? A college degree, a graduate degree, that's it. You're good to go. And, you know, a lot of these things are being called into question right now, and that is producing a lot of anxiety. So I am going to share the screen with the study sheet for today. I will tell you ahead of time that there's a lot to get through, but there's also a lot of questions that I've asked. So there may be times when I can't call on everyone, and I promise you, I swear it is impersonal. It's not that I don't like you or I don't want to hear what you have to say. It's just, you know, I have a certain arc that I want to get through, you know, so that we end up with what we call in, you know, rabbinic Jewish parlance, with a nechemta, that we end on a note of comfort and not on a note of, you know, panic or fear or whatever. So there is a method to the madness when we craft these things. When I craft these things, just like a sermon, there's a method to the madness. And someone is sharing that their 4-year-old grandchild is having a rough time, and I get it. You know, no more preschool. I mean, it's a lot, you know, home all the time, you know, mommies and daddies might not all be as patient as they'd love to be. I bet you a lot of mommies and daddies are praying for patience right about now, or praying for the capacity for grandma and grandpa to take the kids off their hands as they normally do, which is a joy for grandma and grandpa, but it's also a mitzvah for mommy and daddy. So these are all hard things. All right, let me share the screen. Oh, somebody has to give me the capacity to share my screen. One of you wonderful co-hosts. Ah, I'm now a co-host. Okay. This whole thing just blows me away every time. I don't know why, but it does. Okie dokie. So I didn't mean to do that. Go away. I don't know how to get rid of this. If I go like this, will it go away? No. Okay, never mind. Just pretend it's not there. I apologize. I clicked on the wrong thing. I know there's a way to share with taking out like all this stuff that from my computer, you know, so that you just see the page, but I don't know how to do that. So I think.
Do you want to try really quick?
Yes, go ahead.
So go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Okay, here we go. Yep.
And then try it again, and it's going to give you options of which part of your screen you want to share.
Optimize screen share for video clip?
No, when you click screen share, it should give you like a couple of different boxes.
It just says basic, advanced. It doesn't really.
Okay. I don't know then. Shelly?
No, as far as I know, that gives the same options that you were talking about, Nina.
Okay, well, all right, here we go. Y'all have to deal with my limited technology. So uncertainty and the unknown. So choosing our fate. So you know I like to start with a contemporary example because I feel like it's easier to kind of get into it. And then you find out after that that all of our traditional texts share the exact same views, just you know, in a different context. That's what I'm trying to say, a different context. Okay. This is Cameron Wright, a 22-year-old senior at Yale, writes, I'm thinking a lot about the unreliability of things. One of the things the pandemic offers is the cruelest reminder that anything is possible. Your whole life can be turned upside down. The people you have spent the past 4 years with can be torn away at a moment's notice, and you can feel constant paranoia that you'll get sick or make others sick. On a broader level, the political systems which are supposed to protect us can fail. The entire logic of our economic system can invert. People can show both their best and their worst selves. I am trying, perhaps in vain, to make something out of this. I believe that life can never and should never be the same after this crisis. I have the foreboding sense, however, that we will emerge from this and find ourselves in a world trying to recreate the status quo ante. Even if that is the case, I can't let that be my own personal response. I want my work to be incessant in reminding others of our own precarity. And I laugh because my spell checker doesn't even recognize the word precarity as a word. I guess you have to go to Yale to know that word. But I would use the word precariousness, but of our own vulnerability, of our own whatever. And this is from an article in the New Yorker that I read yesterday. So what emotions is Wright feeling? Anybody want to weigh in on that? And do they resonate with your own feelings right now? Those two can go together. Or what things in your life have changed. Kind of all one and the same, right? But he is talking about sort of this lack of, really a lack of control and a lack of knowing and unknowing. Sylvia?
Where I am, it's trying to figure out, I know we cannot be in the same place when we come out of this. We just can't be. But where is it that I will be, and how will this affect how I move forward, and how do I continue to feel like I can give to whomever I'm going to give and be part of, is so much in the air because I don't know what's going to happen. And so it leaves this very unsettled sense of, and I don't even have a word for the unsettledness besides.
Well, particularly for many of us, not all of us, but I would guess most of us are planners to some degree. Most of us don't fly by the seat of our pants most of the time. So, it just makes it really hard, because I think what Sylvia says is very true. You don't only not know what the world will look like around us, but we don't even know where we'll be, each one of us individually. I will note, though, that he does not feel despair. That I notice. He does not feel despair, which I think is, it says, somebody wrote helplessness, everything has changed and I don't trust any of the predictions, all completely reasonable responses to what's going on today. Who would have known that, and I don't want to be political, but who could have known in this era when truth itself is called into question constantly, that it would so impact upon us with the coming of this virus? We were all concerned about the untruths that are coming from every area of public life. Somebody wrote, I'm just hoping we can teach an old dog new tricks. I think, Lou, did you have your hand up? Maybe not. Okay. So how do we deal with the uncertainty, the unknown, the precarity of today? So I think these are all very real questions. I think one thing that is hopeful about what he says is that he's committed to not letting things go back to the status quo, that even if they do go back to the status quo, that he himself is not going to allow himself to do that. That he is going to be, whatever his work is, and, he wants to write, he wants to go to law school. This is a remarkable young man. I cut the whole thing way, way, way down. But, if you're interested in reading it, I gave you the site. But, I could go on and on about this young fella. He grew up impoverished. His father died when he was very young. He was on a full scholarship to Yale. He's from like some farm in Kansas. It's just a really unusual thing. But anyway, if the writing thing doesn't work out for him, he plans to go to law school. So I'm hopeful by that alone. But anyway, yes, so the situation is constantly fluid, which is very difficult too, because the research keeps changing, giving us new information. I have to decide what's best for me and who provides the information. I've got to take this off because people are texting me about other things. Okay. All right. Claire, I have to decide what's best for me and make a determination about what provides the most accurate information, who or what. Okay, moving on to, this is much harder. I'm just giving you a heads up. Bernard-Henri Levy is probably one of the foremost Jewish philosophers of our time. This is translated from the French. It was published in Tablet Magazine a couple days ago, but he basically makes 3 points. So this is more philosophical, but it's also, I think, very, very worth reading. So he writes, it's all happening too fast. The propagation of the virus, yes, but also the spread of another virus, the virus of 24/7 news and closed-loop social networks. He's talking about sort of the echo in the cave problem, where people who watch CNN only watch CNN. So they only hear the same things looped over and over and over again, which echoes what they believe. People who watch Fox only watch Fox. So they hear the same things that they believe echoed over and over and over again. So, that's how we've gotten ourselves into the polarized nation and world in which we are. In these first days of spring, there's precious little we can be sure of, but here are a few things. So, the other fellow is 22. This fellow's, probably well into his 80s. First, we're going to have to let go of the idea of a causal link between globalization and the epidemic. It's obvious why this idea appeals to the xenophobic inclinations of some. Today's Chinese virus, tomorrow's mistrust of foreigners and immigrants, of whom I honestly wonder what home it is they're exactly supposed to go back to. It's also easy to see how it might feed the great planetary Lent that has become the current trend. So, you know, the globalization it's argued, has caused us to live with too much greed, too much excess, etc. So when he talks about the Lent mentality, right, that's giving things up. So like we've been having too much fun, too much prosperity. Our globalized world was in an overheated state that only a good old-fashioned epidemic could cool down. Meaning somehow this was nature or the universe's way of saying, of putting the brakes on, you know, of saying, whoa, you know, the way we've been living is out of control, over the top, and we need to rein it in for our own good, and the pandemic is a way of making us do that. And Levy is saying that doesn't compute, and here's why. He says the problem, almost like market correction, true. Noah and the ark, very good. You're all brilliant. Next week I'm going to put you in. I'm going to unmute you, and I'm going to be quiet. The problem is you're brilliant, all of you. The problem is that this idea is false. There was no globalization when the Black Plague killed a third of Europe's people from its origins in Genoa and Marseille. There was no globalization during the diphtheria epidemics of the 16th and 17th centuries. And there was even less globalization when the first recorded epidemic struck. This time, the time was 412 BCE, before the Common Era. You know, this is before zero. The place, Perinthus in Thrace, it's in Greece. The moment when the Greek language invented, if not the thing itself, then at least its name. And I like this, I highlighted it. Epidemos, really epidemic, this is where the word comes from, literally on the people. The first calamity that, in contrast to the biblical idea of a scourge afflicting the firstborn, falls on the entire people without distinction as to age, status, or moral purity. So epidemic means on the people, meaning it transcends everything, race, religion, socioeconomic class, you know, moral purity, meaning this is how it is in the Bible, but I talked about this last Shabbat morning in my Divorce Torah. Unfortunately, it's how it is in our world too. We tend to blame people for getting sick. You know, like they did something. That's a moral judgment. When an epidemic, it has nothing to do with that. An epidemic is on all the people. It's blind to any of those things. Those are just ways that we rationalize to make ourselves feel better. Oh, well, I don't eat snakes, so therefore, you know, not on me, you know, which we found out is not true, because 60,000 Americans are dead and over 1 million are sick, and none of them, I would venture to guess, eat snakes. Some of them may have them as pets, but I don't think they eat the snakes. So he says Hippocrates, who was there, tells us that the disease began with a dry cough followed by hot flashes and suffocation. This epidemic, he said, nearly wiped out the city. So why does Levy say it is wrong to blame a pandemic on globalization? Because it doesn't have anything to do with that. You know, our partying too much did not cause an epidemic. What are the downsides to making an illness of any kind into an issue of moral purity or lack thereof? Well, you know, there's millions of issues. You know, people will be ashamed. They won't admit there's a problem. They won't seek help for the problem. You know, it'll just spread more widely. You know, anytime people are afraid, think of the AIDS epidemic. People were afraid to get tested because they didn't want the stigma of having AIDS. Well, that doesn't help, right? Because everyone they then came into contact with didn't get, it's blaming the victims, exactly. Everyone they came into contact with didn't know that they had an infected partner, and then they couldn't get tested, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we're not going to, since there's 2 more points, we don't have to go yet with the agree or disagree. Second, this is his second point. So you can't blame globalization, very unhelpful, or, you know, make it a moral issue, very unhelpful. Second, Yes, boundaries are blurred, right? So we have a responsibility to be forthcoming. Thank you, Bob, and real information based on facts, especially from epicenters of the outbreak. Without a doubt, had the Chinese not waited 2 weeks to tell us it was a real epidemic, how many lives could have been saved? Had the current administration taken the notifications in early January more seriously, how many lives could have been saved? It's true. That's true. And the porous borders, meaning something can spread from China to South Korea to Israel to Europe to the United States in a matter of, a week. Just that is true. That aspect of globalization, that the world has gotten smaller, that is true. There is something to that. And I think that this feeds into this whole point of blaming other people. We want to think of ourselves in silos. Oh, well, in the United States, we're the most civilized country in the world. The pandemic won't harm us. Our medical system is, far greater than any others. We understand hygiene. When in fact, what a pandemic teaches us is it's on all the people, because all the people are one, right? We're one humanity. Okay. Second, he says, nothing has really changed over the past 2,000 years in how societies try to guard against a new virus. Hippocrates, again, in his account of the episode of the cough of Pernithus, remember the dry cough, it started with a dry cough, offers a list of preventative measures that might easily be mistaken for those recommendations by today's epidemiologists. Boccaccio in the Decameron explains that the only way of dealing with the mortal pestilence is to shut oneself up in isolation, to stop visiting family members, to ensure that citizens avoid each other and themselves, right? It's the same exact things we hear today. By the way, last week's double Torah portion, Tazaria Metzora, the same thing. They call the priest checks out the affliction, whatever it is, then quarantines them for a week, then goes back and checks again. If it's still there, they quarantine them for another week. It's still there. It's the same exact thing. And that is a couple thousand years old. Of course, today's medicine is not the medicine of Hippocrates, thank God. And the chances are good that globalized research will not be long in finding a cure and a vaccine, please God. But in the meantime, we are where we are. We are no better off when nature confronts us with a new virus than Boccaccio's contemporaries. Come to think of it, there's something deeply tragic in the archaic quality of our systems of defense and replies. So what do we think of this? Why is it tragic? Because in a lot of ways it's true. Not in every way, but in a lot of ways it is true. That we use, and I'll just wait a minute, and if there are no hands, I'll tell you why I think it's tragic. Okay, I'll ask myself, Rabbi Roz, why do you think it's tragic? I think it's tragic because for many reasons, we really don't look ahead. I've said every time we plan sessions on end-of-life issues, like 3 people show up. Because people don't want to talk about those issues because they're afraid if they talk about them, maybe in some way they'll hasten their demise, that will kind of bring on bad karma or something. So similarly, there have been people predicting that a major pandemic, I know Fauci said, I don't know how many years ago, he said, I don't know if he wrote a book or he didn't write a book, or he wrote an article, but he said, his biggest fear is an airborne pandemic that affects the upper respiratory tract. It would wipe us out. And of course, that's what we're experiencing now. And, it's like global warming. It's like sea level rise. It's like all of these things. We don't want to, we don't plan ahead, or we don't want to look at these things carefully because maybe it's overwhelming, maybe it's terrifying, maybe the cost is astronomical, which we're finding the cost is astronomical anyway, right? I'm talking about the financial cost. The human cost is even worse. But anyway, So in some ways, we're treating this epidemic the exact same way they treated epidemics in the Torah and in ancient Greece, exactly the same prescriptions, which should teach us at the very least that social distancing does work to a certain extent. But anyway, but beyond that, hopefully we will have a vaccine, that science has advanced in that way. So, and one last comment from Levy, which I think, Abby Pactor wrote, it's like the song, When Will They Ever Learn? And Meryl wrote, what is tragic is that we continue to try to find a scapegoat to blame. Exactly. And last week's Tazria Mitzora, how do you purify the leper? Well, you place their sins on the head of a goat and you chop off the goat's head. That's where the scapegoat comes from. So, that's how you get a scapegoat. Exactly. And this is one last thing from Levy. The illusion of a post-virus world that supposedly will pick up again as before, philosophers of medicine have refuted this trope of seeing a disease as an attack that tests the healthy body, and then once the attack is fought off, restores to its former integrity. A body, be it biological or social, always comes out damaged, marked, and transformed by the passage of a new virus. So, we talked about this last week, remember, with Jacob wrestling with the angel. He prevails, but he's forever changed. His hip is dislocated by this being, man, angel, whatever. So that's what Levy's saying. The body, whether it's society or the human, either way. Anyway, so someone's writing, Jane says, somehow this short-term approach contracts with the people who took multiple generations to build a cathedral. Is it a failure of faith? I'm not sure. Maybe. I mean, in part, certainly. Video chatting. Okay. Southern Italy is full of churches built to stop the plague. At least most of us work to solve the problem where it arises, to learn more about microscopic mechanisms. Okay, thanks, Catherine. We're going to get to that. Believe it or not, that's in this too. So it's a good bet that for better or for worse, tomorrow's world will not be the same as yesterday's. For worse, a China that will presume to give us lessons on how to manage a health crisis. Kenohora, right? Which means, the evil eye shouldn't look upon us. That should not happen. For worse, a strengthened reflex to fall back to our fortress, to say goodbye and good luck to the world of the poor and the afflicted. The reason he says this, and I've cut a lot out of this as well. I wish we could all read the whole articles together, but for the interest of time. But I think what he's saying by this is that what we've seen is, even though an epidemic attacks all people, it does attack worse the poor, those who have fewer resources, poor nutrition, less access. I mean, just think about this. You can't get a test, even if you can get a test, you can't get a test without a referral from a doctor. If you don't have a relationship with a doctor, good luck finding a doctor that will see you to give you a referral for a test in this time. Good luck. I mean, honest to God, I heard a horror story about, this wasn't in the news, somebody told me about a friend of theirs who, went into the hospital with a problem, and the specialist for that problem refused to come in to see them for that problem because of fear of the virus. And now the person's on death's door for that problem, not for the virus, but, anyway. Is there any way to share these articles with us after the lunch and learn by email? Absolutely. In fact, when the link was sent out yesterday, the attachment for last week is at the bottom. So if you go back and look, even doctors can't get tests. I believe it's Sahar. Or post them in the Temple Bulletin. Oh my God, the whole thing? Oh no, we couldn't do that. This thing is like 16 pages long. Kenohora. But anyway, but we could post them on the Temple website. Maybe that's what you meant, Bob. We can post them on the Temple website. Okay, so here about for better. Okay, this is a positive outcome. The citizens of Milan and Paris leaning from the windows of their buildings to thank healthcare workers, the white knights of the Republic. Right? Which of the two, the humiliation of the democracies or their ennoblement, will carry the day? The decision lies with each of us, guided by our sorrow and our faith. Interestingly, someone here said it's, a failure of leadership that we look to our leaders, or we expect our leaders to do the planning for us. Perhaps that's a failure of leadership. It is a failure of leadership, but I think it's also a failure of us not demanding that from our leaders, because nobody wants to go there because the implications are scary. Okay, so here we're just going to look at this last question. Are his thoughts exhilarating, as in the future is ours to envision and create, or terrifying, as in I hate change and I won't like the new world? And, probably many of us fall somewhere in between. Some of us may feel like, oh my God, I'm not that creative. I cannot figure out how the world could look. So this is, in a way, it's an opportunity to dream, and then to get people into office who, share our vision. Okay. Be strong and of good courage, even though it is hard. All right, so now we're going to the Torah. Now I'm like going 100 miles a minute. I hope I'm not talking too fast for y'all. Okay, Sodom and Gomorrah. I have 3 biblical examples. So here is the first one. I hope you all know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Bad people in the city, we think that it's sexual violations, okay, and God has enough with it. Then one of the men, or the angels of messengers of God, says to Lot, Abraham's nephew, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed as one who jests. Lot didn't take him seriously. If it's like I said, you guys better get out of Dodge because there's a pandemic coming that's going to wipe out, I don't know how many. And everybody would look at me like, Rabbi Roz, you don't have a crystal ball, right? As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city. Still Lot delayed. It's not so easy, right? To give up what you know and love. So the men seized his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters, and in the Lord's mercy on him, they brought him out and left him outside the city. They literally have to drag him away, him and his family away, literally, right? When they had brought him outside, one said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stop anywhere on the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away. As the sun rose upon the earth, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. Why does Lot's wife turn back? Why? The angels of God said, don't look back. Why does she look back? Okay, good. We're getting some, okay, Barbara Dudley.
You're muted. Okay. It's hard to leave what you know, even though there were specific instructions. When you've lived in a place for a long time and it's your comfort, your home, even as you flee, you turn back for one last look. It's human nature.
Good. And we thank you, Barbara. And some other people said that it was her home, exclamation point. She doesn't trust in what she's being told. You can't help it. It's human curiosity. It's difficult and scary to leave home behind. David, were you going to say something similar?
No.
Similar.
David Titus?
Similar.
Similar.
Similar, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Similar. Nancy or Jay, she wants to remember who she was and what she had. fear of the unknown ahead, Seher, very good. So all of the above, right? So why am I giving this example? I don't believe God is raining sulfurous fire down on us, but the feelings are the same, right? The world is changing. It looks different and it's scary and it's hard not to look back. It's hard. But what happens if we only look back? What's her turn? She turns into a pillar of salt. What's that a metaphor for, possibly? What happens if we only look back? Right? It's a challenge, Earl Marie, from separating memories you should keep from longing to go back. She's stuck where she was. It just feels like a giant wake-up call. The salt is our tears. The pillar of salt is being stuck. Tears. We don't look forward or change. Might the outcome have been different if the Lord had said, only look forward, keep your eyes on the hills ahead? Maybe, possibly. That's a good point too, Sylvia. It's possible. If you live in the past, you can't grow or repair the world. Good. So I think this story is really a very clear reminder that we can't only look back. You know, if our thinking is we're gonna go back to what was as it was, you know, very scary. Either Nancy or Jay, excellent salt is used for preservation. Very good. Actually, I did look this up because I wanted to know why you know, salt. And it turns out that there are many myths in other parallel cultures, in other Near Eastern cultures, etc., where people disobeyed the gods and turned into a pillar of salt. So apparently that's, you know, a thing. But I think it's like that because of the metaphor, you know. Okay, good. Standing at the sea. This is what happens when the Israelites are leaving Egypt and they're being chased by Pharaoh and his army, and they're on the way out and they come to the sea. So none of them are swimmers and none of them are soldiers either. So, you know, this is the real rock and a hard place. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness?' But Moses said to the people, 'Have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace.' And then the Lord said to Moses, 'Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward.'" So just very briefly, you know, what's happening, the Israelites don't like their odds, and they would rather go back to being slaves in Egypt, right, than face the unknown. Facing the unknown is more terrifying than being in a state of slavery, you know, which is part of the reason I think why we don't want to, you know, look forward a lot. But the answer that Moses gives is have faith, right? God will take care of you. And God's answer is, what's God's answer? God has the best answer. It's one of my favorite answers. Right. Alice is smiling. God has a great answer. Carol? From? You have to unmute probably.
God is saying, trust me. Trust
Okay,
in me.
good.
Trust
Trust
in
me
me.
and do what?
Trust me to do what I promised, to take care of
Okay.
people, to free them and give them life beyond Egypt.
But what
Tell the
do they have to do in order for God to fulfill the promise?
They have to keep moving.
They have to keep moving. Exactly. You know, I like to tell people in Judaism, God helps those who help themselves, right?
Mhm.
You know,
Yes.
yes, you have to have faith, but you also have to rely on your own capacity. You know, it's like, and that we're going to see this in a minute here. It's kind of like, you know, in the whole story of Purim, which was the last time we all gathered, really, in person, truly, it was the last time we all gathered in person. 3 days later, we everything shut down. You know, who saves the Jewish people? God is never even mentioned. You know, it's Esther and Mordecai, or Mordecai and Esther, however you want to say it. Anyway, okay, so even in an age in which God splits the seas, the Torah places tremendous emphasis on human beings taking the first step. God will not save the Israelites unless and until they are willing to go forward into the unknown. The sea will not split until someone is intrepid enough to proceed. In our own day, God does not split seas or accompany Israel in a cloud. God's presence is more subtle and elusive, God's involvement more mysterious. If in a time when God's saving presence was manifest, people were nevertheless called upon to take matters into their own hands, all the more so are we required to do so now in a time when God's presence is hidden or even absent. So that's Rabbi Shai held, right? God says, get going. If not me, who? If not now, when? That's Rabbi Hillel. Thank you, Jane and David. Excellent. Okay, good. Good. So here's another commentary on that same text. This guy's funny, this Rabbi Engelmeyer. I don't know who he is, but he sounds a little more traditional. This guy Moshe is bad news. We know he's not, but they do not. Sure, those plagues were impressive and the magicians could not duplicate most of them, but so what? These were all natural events, so what was there to believe? As for plague number 10, the people only had Moshe's word that it happened. They could see the bloody waters, the hail, and the locusts, even the darkness, but they only had Moshe's word that all of Egypt's firstborn, and only the firstborn, died that night. After all, Israel left Egypt as soon as it was light. Why did they not prepare bread and other provisions for the journey? For one thing, because maybe they did not fully believe Moshe. So, you know, Rabbi Engelmeyer explains the Israelites' incredulity about the slaying of the firstborn. They didn't see it with their own eyes. So I wonder if people who are not affected by or afflicted with the virus have more trouble seeing or believing that it's real. Because we are seeing that in certain, you know, places where the virus is less, less prevalent, that there's more, there's more of an outcry to get back to work sooner, even somewhat, people sitting in an ivory tower, people who are still getting paychecks, it's easier to espouse that we continue quarantining. For other people for whom it's not so in their face, Bob Johns is saying less than 50% in public cover up. Yes, and Mr. Vice President was at the Mayo Clinic yesterday in the coronavirus ward without a mask, even though that is the policy of the clinic, and everybody else was, including the doctors and nurses, etc. So I said a prayer for him because I don't want to make a political statement, but I just worry for his well-being because that is just not smart. Okay, the miracles that brought the Hebrews release were not enough for them, but it was not because their standards for faith in God had risen. Rather, I think, this is David Sofian, he's a Reform rabbi. Rather, I think the point is that real faith cannot be established through the experience of miracles alone, if through miracles at all. Without the context of an entire religious way of life, no number of miracles would have been sufficient to establish true faith. The text is teaching us that religious character is built on our experience of living routine life. The way we experience the regular or even ordinary aspects of human life is what profoundly determines our behavior and attitude toward life. Solid faith is constructed on a whole pattern of living, not on momentary experiences, no matter how dramatic. So, all of you are taking part in this class, etc. So, obviously, to some extent, you're trying to set the ground for living a religious life, every day, not just in the case, of the coronavirus. But do you think he's true? Do you think he's right that that faith has to be lived out day in and day out, that it can't happen as a response only to like a one-time miracle? That's what he's saying here, I think. Or in question number 4, I said, do you believe your attitude toward the ordinary aspects of human living or your everyday behavior and attitude toward life are helping you cope with the upheaval and uncertainty of this time? I think he's saying that your attitudes don't change, that faith has to be constructed on more regular, consistent, solid ground. Okay, let's see here. Religion is not to be practiced only on weekends. I learned on 9/11 that there are so many miracles to be noticed in the midst of catastrophe. There are so many miracles happening in the pandemic. Absolutely, undoubtedly, the world is built upon Torah, Avodah, and Gemilut Chasadim, the study of Torah, worship, and deeds of loving kindness. Every blessing draws our attention to the daily miracles. That's Catherine telling us you're supposed to say 100 blessings a day, meaning you living a life of faith is helpful. Living out family faith is really different from living out faith in exigent circumstances. There will be a difference always. Okay, good. Jane, did you have your hand up?
Well, I just wanted to say, I didn't think those miracles were aimed at the Hebrews. I thought they were aimed at Pharaoh, and they were to convince him to release them. So they were in a state of disorganization. They'd been there for hundreds of years as slaves, and then they're being led out by Moses. So I think maybe the previous rabbi was a little more relevant to this. But the thing that, really the real one is the one where they step out and go into the sea and then it parts. I think that's the real show of faith. I think that the thing that keeps occurring to me is the conflict between religious faith and belief in wealth and money, and that somehow money is at the heart of so much of our problem in addressing these longer term issues, just as preoccupation with one's own life interferes with an acceptance that, yes, things may be better for everyone, but not necessarily for me individually.
Right. Yeah, and that's an economic, often an economic issue as well.
Right, but also
if in order for things to be better for others, I may have to give up something. That it may not
including my life,
including your life.
Right.
Exactly. Your life.
So
there were a couple really good points here as well. Having faith makes us resilient. It's a well that is deep and that we can return to as often as needed. Thank you, Barbara. From Claire, faith has to be cultivated as a daily attitude and habit transformed in action and affirmation. I couldn't agree more, Rabbi Claire Rice-Wasser. Okay, one more Torah example. I'm watching the time like a hawk, as you know I always do. Okay, this is after the sin of the golden calf, and Moses comes down the mountain. He shatters the first set of tablets of the 10 Commandments, and he's terrified. God has already done in several hundred people who were perpetrators of the golden calf incident. So Moses doesn't feel too good about God continuing to be with the people. So Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. Further, you have said, I have singled you out by name, and you have indeed gained my favor. Now, if I have truly gained your favor, God, pray let me know your ways, that I may know you and continue in your favor. Consider too that this nation is your people. And God said, I will go in the lead and I will lighten your burden. And Moses says to God, unless you go in the lead, do not make me leave this place. For how shall it be known that your people have gained your favor unless you go with us? And the Lord says to Moses, for the third time, that's my addition, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. And then Moses says, well, then let me see your presence. What is it that Moses wants? What does he want? What is he nudging God for? God keeps telling him, you know, God, everything he asks for, God says, yes, I'm going to do it. Yes, I'm going to do it. Ruth Shepard. We have to unmute you, honey. There you go. Ruth Shepard. Okay. We'll come back to you. Oh, there you are. Yes.
In order to understand God and where he's coming from, he needed to know his name.
Okay, that happens. Yes, that's like in the further discussion, you know, then he asks for the name. But he wants proof, right, Ruth? He's seeing is believing. He wants to know God's going to go with him. He wants certainty. He wants to see God's presence. Then he's going to ask God's name. You know, he keeps pushing because he wants, as Jay and Nancy are saying, guarantees, right? Moses wants God to protect the people and doesn't realize God's already doing it. Right? But in God's way, not Moses's way. Moses wants proof, right? Back to our whole thing. We want certainty. We want to know. And God, okay. And God answers after, let me see your presence. And God answers. This is like, last week we had one of Catherine's favorite passages in Torah. This is mine. And God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Lord and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But God said, you cannot see my face, for man cannot see me and live. So what does God say? What you can't see God's presence. What can you see? You can't see God's image. You can't, you know what I mean? You can't know God's name. You can't know God in the way we know another person. Okay, God says you can see faith. Okay, good. Barbara, what else is God saying you can see? What does this mean? I will make all my goodness pass before you. Where do we see the goodness? Somebody says in God's actions, in intentions, in all of God's wondrous works. You can see the signs of God in burning bushes and babies. Okay, where else? In life itself, okay? How about in our actions? There we go, Catherine Morton. In our own courage, right? In our own good deeds. What is to me, aside from seeing the nurses on the news every day, you know, sobbing because of how horrific their work conditions are in the hospitals in New York, which just breaks my heart. And they don't have the right equipment to protect themselves, and they're, you know, watching people die right and left and interfacing with, you know, the patients and their families, because the families can't be with their loved ones who are dying. I mean, aside from that, the huge thing that's coming out of this is all the good things people are doing to help, right? I mean, this is where you see the worst, but you also see the best of humanity. Okay, yes. Right, God's back could be all of your friends and family who are supporting you, willingness to continue to move forward, compassion for self and others. Thank you, Karen. Good in the actions of people, Ron and Andrea. God is always with us. But to see God, we have to die, so we have to believe in God's guidance. Okay, good. Thanks, Carol. So, so that's that. You know, all of these are wonderful answers. Like I said, one week I'm going to just put you on the microphone, and I'll just sit back and enjoy. And the Lord said, see, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen. So God, again, is is promising to protect us, and that is an act of faith on our part. Then the Lord says to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you shattered. Why is the next set of tablets going to be like the first? Why can't it be word for word, whatever was on the first set of commandments? This is an answer to the question before. Sylvia, we stand on the backs of others as we learn and grow. We do not know on whose shoulders and backs we stand to a certain extent. Good, the world has changed. Great. Thank you both. Catherine, exactly, the world has changed. But I'll tell you something really interesting. There's a midrash that teaches what happened to the pieces of the shattered tablets of the first set. What happened to them? And the answer given by the rabbis is those broken pieces were put into the Ark of the Covenant with the new tablets, right? We carry those pieces with us. The broken pieces of our lives, of our past, of our society, we carry them with us. I think this is incredibly powerful midrash. Some of them are not, but this one for sure. You know, they remain with us. Nonetheless, things look different. Okay, moving right along, I'm watching. Coping with the unknown. Okay, a couple of rabbinic, 3 actually, rabbinic quotes. Moses spoke in accordance, rabbinic means post-Torah-itic, like not from the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, not from the Hebrew Bible, from like the Mishnah, Talmud, writings, responsa, etc., all the text moving forward. Moses spoke in accordance with the principle articulated by the master. Accustom your tongue to say, I do not know, lest you become entangled in a web of deceit. So we could interpret this literally, right? People who claim they know everything, by the way, I call those people Ike. I know everything. So you'll know now. If I refer to someone as Ike, that's what we're talking about. That kind of a person. Thank you, Karen. Even in their brokenness, the essence of their message is still there. It's exactly. Okay, so that's the literal way, right? That if you claim you know everything, you know, you could be perpetrating, you know, and you make stuff up, or you could use the S of it that starts another word, and you make stuff up. You know, you are tangled in a web of lies. Don't drink Clorox. I'm just saying it, right? We don't have a cure. We know we don't have a cure. God willing, one day we will. I heard that the Israelis think that they may be ready for human clinical trials on a vaccine in the summer. That would be great, but we don't have a trial. Okay, it's honest. Honesty is better than deceit. And Sandy writes, God bless you, Sandy Forte Nickenig. Right now, we don't even know what we don't know, which is so true. We know so little about this virus. You know, not cats and dogs get it. I mean, we just don't know, you know. We don't know what we don't know. I'm funny. Thank you. I'm situationally funny. I'm not funny like ha-ha, stand-up funny. But on my feet, I'm funny, which is good for a rabbi. Yes, tigers too. Thank you, Barbara. Tigers too. But in what way might our inability to sit in the unknown entangle us in a web of deceit vis-a-vis the virus? This is in the wrong place. Okay, I can answer my own question, right? But if we're not willing to admit that we don't know what we don't know, we get ourselves into all sorts of trouble, right? Sylvia, go ahead. I am trying hard not to call people twice, but Sylvia, go ahead, honey.
Our brains are built to answer. Our brains are built to find nouns, and they're built to find verbs, and we're built to find or create an answer, even if we don't put it in the form of a theory. But the problem is that we don't know how to stop ourselves when it's really only a theory or idea. We just
blurt it out. Right. People want to be heard. That's for sure. People definitely want to be heard. People definitely want to be heard, without a doubt, without a doubt. But, you know, it's like we were talking about earlier. If you're not right, the urge to believe a certain truth may send us down the wrong path. It's a wise person who knows what they don't know, or who knows that they don't know. You know, sometimes they say the older I get, the more I realize, the less I know, you know, that kind of thing. But, this inability to sit in this very uncomfortable place, even just people's, people's desire to, people's inability to, you know, kind of stay home, you know, like they just cannot do it. They can't do it. It's just really hard because it's danger for everybody. Good. It's hard to say, I don't know. Okay. All right. He said to them, go out and see what is a straight path that a person should cling to. So this is advice, right? For how to keep on that straight and narrow. A good eye, a good friend, a good neighbor, seeing the consequences of our actions, having a good heart. So how can any of these things help us to, you can write these in the thing because it's good. This is kind of a short answer. How can any of these things help us to help keep us out of a web of deceit, right? Help make it more tenable to sit in the unknown. There can be many straight paths for each of us. It is dependent on the day, time, and circumstance of our lives. Exactly, without a doubt. We can unpack these as well. Having a good eye, you know, maybe that's being able to discern the truth from Narishkeit, which is nonsense, right? There are certainties and we can cling to those. A good friend, a good neighbor, a good heart provides the opportunity for the arising of compassion and loving kindness and a willingness to alleviate suffering. Excellent. Thank you, Tommy. Bob, looking to ourselves, but also to our community. Excellent. Seeing the consequences of our actions. That's helpful too, right? Our OST family and friends. Absolutely, 100%. I know you all are keeping me afloat, you know. I'm acutely aware that, you know, if I endanger myself, I'm not only endangering others like my husband, who's, you know, very vulnerable, but I also can't be there for you. And that's not okay. So that's, you know, keeps me extra vigilant. All right, good. All right, here's another one. This is a much more expounded upon. This is the last one in this section. Greater is learning Torah than the priesthood and then royalty. For royalty is acquired by 36 stages and the priesthood by 24. But Torah, right, learning Torah is acquired by 48 things. So I would say learning all kinds of things is acquired by these 48 things. So I'm going to run through them. You be thinking while we're running through them, which ones are helpful to you that you are already in possession of, which ones you practice, which ones it would be helpful for you to kind of strive to have in your life or to, by study, attentive listening, proper speech, an understanding heart, an intelligent heart, by awe, by fear, by humility, by joy, by attending to the sages, by critical give and take with friends, by fine argumentation with disciples, by clear thinking, by studying scripture, by study of Mishnah, by a minimum of sleep, by a minimum of chatter, by a minimum of pleasure, by a minimum of frivolity, by a minimum of preoccupation with worldly matters, by long suffering, by generosity, by faith in the sages, by acceptance of suffering. And then there's more, right? Because 48 is a long list. Learning Torah is also acquired by one who recognizes his place, who rejoices in his portion, who makes offense about his words, who takes no credit for himself, who is loved, who loves God, who loves his fellow creatures, who loves righteous ways, who loves reproof, who loves uprightness, who keeps himself far from honors, who does not let his heart become swelled on account of his learning, who does not delight in giving legal decisions. That excludes you, all of the judges in our midst, who shares in the bearing of a burden with his colleague, who judges with the scales weighted in his favor, who leads him on to truth, who leads him on to peace, who composes himself at his study, who asks and answers, who listens to others and himself, who adds to his knowledge, who learns in order to teach, who learns in order to practice, who makes his teacher wiser, who is exact in what he has learned, and who says a thing in the name of him who said it, right? Meaning you attribute what you say to the person who said it. Thus you have learned. Everyone who says a thing in the name of him who said it brings deliverance into the world, as it is said, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. Okay, so how are these values? How are they, how are these Torah-based values and behaviors helpful to practice during a time of crisis and unknown like we're living in right now? Do any of them stand out to you? You can put it in the thing here. We have trusting oneself. I like that. Sandy, very good. I'll leave it on this screen for a few minutes, for a minute, and then I'll move it to the next one so you can reread them. Similarly, do any of them not ring true to you? Like, are not helpful? Because this is the wisdom our tradition's giving us for how we live within uncertainty, how we conduct our lives. Okay, good. Humility, excellent. We don't know what we don't know. Attentive listening, good. Less chatter, more pleasure. Very good. I love that. Minimum of sleep, it's the only way I can keep up with the new information coming from the World Health Organization and the CDC. That's true. A minimum of sleep, but you know, we could also flip that and say like a reasonable amount of sleep, you know, not sleeping too much, which can be a sign of depression and escaping the world, not sleeping too little, right, which can be very unhelpful. Long suffering and generosity. Okay, minimum of sleep does not ring true. Okay, it certainly a minimum of sleep does not ring true. Critical conversations with friends and colleagues. Thank you, Lou. Yeah, that is helpful. You know, if you notice, we don't have a lot of that in our world. Critical conversations with friends and colleagues. We only have critical conversations with friends and colleagues who share our beliefs. Which is problematic, you know, because nobody wants to get into it with other people. Humility, because I can get self-righteous when people think differently than I do. Okay, excellent. Not helpful. Not helpful. Excellent. Okay, I'm coming to this next part here. It does seem that quite a few are about humility. Who is loved? Who loves God? I would say not only who is loved, but who loves. I struggle to not remain preoccupied with worldly matters. My anger with the lack of compassion or reliance on science dominates my emotions. Yes, I totally could see that. It is very hard. Working on being slow to anger can be very difficult, especially when the stakes are so high. Generosity is very important to help the less fortunate. I agree. And that's what Levi was saying at the beginning, right? That, you know, are we going to, when this is over, become a more compassionate society or a more selfish one? You know, which way are we going to go? Sharing burdens, listening to others, choosing life, excellent. All really, really, really good answers. Okay, so that is, let me just see what my other questions were. We already did the disagree. How is participating in Lunch and Learn or things like Musar or Torah study helpful? How might these help us to cope with the fear of our own mortality, the safety of our loved ones, the precarity? Now I love that word and I can't use it enough, of today and the uncertainty of tomorrow. And where might be a good place to start? Those are rhetorical. I'm leaving that for all of you. It's so important to know the origin of what we repeat, he or she who adds to his or her life or knowledge. Okay, this is the very last one in my very last minute. Right, you get to see the faces of your friends at Zoom. At what point does the renaming of things actually transform a world around you? Can it? Can you build a vocabulary of faith out of rhetoric, first made of dread, and then stand behind this new language? Is faith created by a shift in rhetoric, one that can be consciously constructed, or must there be a shattering experience, one that trashes the old words for things? So, you know, how can we change the negative to positive? How can we shift our fear into faith? Can we change our vocabulary and shift our rhetoric in a way that actually transforms our thinking and then our actions? Can our words transform our thinking and then our actions? So that's where I'm going to leave all of you. I will have Shelley send this out like tomorrow, you know what I mean? So that you can reread it, because there's a lot in here for all of us to consider. I'll leave the next section for another class. We'll have plenty of time next week or the week after, etc. So thank you all for being here today. I know we had to get through a lot, but it's, you know, this just teaches me how much wisdom there is in our tradition. It's incredible, you know, and I could have picked 100 other examples. I'm sure if somebody else was crafting this or organizing this, they would, you know, it would have different, you know, different examples or illustrations in it. All right, everybody, it's great to see your faces too. And I look forward to seeing you whenever. Some of you women I'll see in Musard this evening probably, some of you tomorrow in Torah study, some of you on Shabbat, etc., etc. So just be well and be careful. Bye-bye.